Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
I'm with Amy Kazmin, South Asia Bureau Chief of the Financial Times, a British paper, but Amy is a US national, and Sanjay Baru, former press advisor to former Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh, and now the distinguished fellow at IDSA, which is the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis. This is the Print Debates, property at the Print, where we discuss the burning issue of the day, and what better than to ask both of you to discuss the US presidential debate, the first of three, which has taken place early this morning, India time. Welcome to both of you, Amy and Sanjay.
Thank you for having me.
So the first question to both of you is your first comments on the debate. Amy.
Look, I think that the debate was unlike any presidential debate ever seen in the US history, and probably nothing less than would be expected from a debate dominated by US President Donald Trump, who has shown himself to be unconventional, lack of respect for rules, protocols, propriety, procedure. Right. And, I think that it really was like a mud wrestling match or a mudslinging match. Some of the US commentators described it as a dumpster fire. It was a very unusual debate.
A dumpster meaning a garbage bin, which is what we call in Indian English. But Dr. Baru, Amy is right. It was almost like both these presidential candidates. I mean, President Trump is still president, but Joe Biden is a presidential candidate. Well, in an Indian television studio, there was massive distrust. The mutual antagonism was so clear, descending into name calling. Joe Biden called Trump a clown. In return, Trump said Biden was Putin, which is the Russian President Vladimir Putin's puppy. What did you think was going on?
Well, I mean, Amy has seen more presidential debates than I have, but I actually saw a couple of debates between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. Uh-huh. And so as far as Mr. Trump's behavior is concerned, I was not surprised. I think it fits a pattern. He's behaved like this right through. And in fact, if anything, he was worse with Hillary Clinton. So I think, to me, what was surprising was that I think Mr. Biden and his advisors would have probably taken the view that he has to meet Trump on his ground. Mm-hmm. In other words, that I think it is Biden's strategy was, in a sense, to behave like Trump, mm-hmm. To be seen as aggressive, to be seen as willing to hit back. So I think the strategy, to me, as an outsider, it appeared that Biden, because Biden comes across as a gentleman. I had only one opportunity of actually meeting him when he came once to meet Manmohan Singh many years ago. But whatever one has seen of him, he comes across as a thorough gentleman. Yeah. But I think in this particular first debate, he probably decided that he has to also take on Trump and in some way show that he can hit back. And yes, I agree with Amy. There were, a lot of personal attacks, but that's the way Trump behaves. And I think, as I said, Biden seems to have decided to punch him back.
To hit him back.
Sanjay, I want to say that I slightly disagree with this, in fact, because I think that the way Biden seems to have portrayed himself was, I don't think he came off as aggressive and a puncher. I think he came off as a man who was decent and gentlemanly and wanted to have a debate, but then when he never got a chance to speak and when he was being interrupted constantly, he kind of came off as the gentleman kind of being pushed too far. He can't just...
said, Amy, he said it, he did say to Trump, shut up, man. That's not presidential, is it?
True, but I think the point, Amy, is that if I were a Biden strategist, I would expect Trump to behave the way he did. So therefore, even if Biden began being a gentleman, he would have known that Trump will not behave like a gentleman. So therefore, the strategy would have been, you first behave like a gentleman, but let him behave the way he always does, and then we'll hit back. So that's what I meant.
Yes, and I agree. But even so, I think that on some of the topics, Joe Biden tried to hold back from, some of the more low blows that he could have also landed.
Like what, Amy?
Well, for example, Donald Trump continuously attacked Joe Biden's family, and in one which was really, a kind of, really showed a lack of sensitivity when Joe Biden was talking about his dead son who had served in Iraq and later died of brain cancer,
right,
and was kind of trying to use that to talk about veterans issues and the importance of the military. Hunter kept interrupting him, and
Trump kept interrupting him
and referring to the other son, Hunter, who is alive. And that's kind of insensitive. I mean, a man is talking about his son who died incredibly young, far too early, and Trump is like cutting him off and raising, the name of the other son. On the other hand, Biden never at any moment spoke at all about the Trump children whose own, who have plenty of their own issues that could be raised. So I think that Biden was trying to hold a line of some kind of presidential and decency while also not appearing like a weakling and show that he could hit back, but not kind of broadening the attack and going on the full offensive. That's kind of how I saw it.
So, Sanjay, I was wondering if we could, talk a little bit about the issues, and of course, this personal sort of name calling across the discussion of all these issues. For example, on the economy, on COVID, and there were a couple of instances where India also came up, but we will talk about that in a bit. But let's first talk about the economy. Biden saying that when he and Obama left the country and Trump became president, the economy was much better. By the way, the New York Times has fact-checked that and found that it's not true. And Trump responding by saying that he's the one who brought the jobs back, brought a lot of companies back from China, and that he intends to stay that course.
Well, I think on the economy story, Trump had a decent base a few months ago. Things looked good even before COVID, and certainly even in the first few months of the pandemic, the story from the US was not a bad story. And in fact, at that point, I remember many analysts were saying that if the economy continues to do well, then Trump would be on a stronger wicket. But it seems to me that in the last few weeks, things have become worse. And so how things will pan out between now and November will be very important. Because it's not been a complete washout as far as the economy is concerned for Trump. But his inability to get control over the COVID situation, I think that has certainly made the economic situation worse. There are larger challenges. I mean, the trade war, for example, with China, I don't think the benefits of that have yet come to fruition. For example, you refer to jobs coming back to the US. That's more in the future. I'm not yet sure how many jobs have come back from China to the US. Certainly jobs have moved from China to Vietnam and to Indonesia,
and other
Malaysia. So American companies have taken jobs out of China, but to other countries, I don't know how many of them have come back to the United States.
So Amy, what do you think? You work for a financial paper. Do you think that the economy is a big issue going forward? It is the most powerful job in the world. So do you think Trump was able to put across his view that he's been able to bring do as much to the economy as any president could?
Look, before talking about the details of the state of the U.S. economy, I just want to draw your attention to a couple of things about the role of the debate in a U.S. presidential election.
Uh-huh.
I think at this point in time, both Trump has his core supporters who are with him no matter what.
Right.
Then there are the people who despise Trump and who are gonna, who will never support him no matter what. So the issue in this debate is, number one, how much could Trump move, that small percentage of undecided voters And then how much could this debate affect both the Trump and the Biden supporters to motivate them to either vote or demotivate the other side not to vote?
So this is about 14% of the population is supposed to be an undivided,
undecided. So the question is, like, number one, could this debate make any undecided voters, break this way or break that way and decide?
Do you think it could?
I mean, I do think it could. But it's very, I'm here and I haven't lived in the US in a long time. It's very hard for me to kind of get into the minds of the US voter. But what I do feel that the US voter got was an absolutely pure, unblemished, unfiltered, no filters look at Donald Trump and who he is and how he operates and what kind of man he is and what kind of person he was. And
so we've seen that over the last 4 years, Amy, haven't we? In a sense,
we have seen that, but now
there were no surprises. That's who he is. He's an aggressive man, and he came out aggressively. There were no holds barred. I mean, he sort of undermined Biden in any way he could, including attacking his family. But my question to you is, do you think that this president that we've seen in these last 4 years, will he be able to hold his nerve and make the American people believe that, yes, he can be presidential for another 4 years?
I mean, I don't think he's been very presidential for the last 4 years. So I don't think that people are necessarily voting for him to be presidential in that classic sense. I mean, it seems like what they voted for was somebody who would burn the house down. And, he is continuing to act like that person who will, he's trying to kind of balance this presidential with somebody who's at the same time calling into question the very validity of the US election and casting doubt on the process. So
strong words, Amy, don't you think, Dr. Baru, don't you think, Amy's words that he's burning the house down. In your experience, do you think, and okay, let's talk about the India question. For India, do you think Trump has been a good US president?
Well, yes and no. I mean, it's difficult to say what we now mean by good for India. If you take India's problems, I don't think in the last 4 years that he has been president, he has actually sorted out any of our problems, whether it's with Pakistan or with China or with the economy, on trade. Trump has been...
the Americans have supported you on China, no doubt, with the ongoing crisis in Ladakh. It's the Americans that are backing you.
Jyoti, words. I'm not talking of words. We have not seen action on the ground.
No, what kind of action? You can't expect the Americans to fight with you shoulder to shoulder.
No, I would like to see what exactly the US is willing to do to deal with China that will benefit India. For example, the intelligence sharing, giving us technology that we need for in the mountains. So I don't know. I mean, as I said, the problem with China, and of course, I can get into a long lecture on this, but really, I'm not worried about the military to military imbalance between India and China. So if you're going to say United States is giving you this technology and that weapon, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the economic relationship. Mm-hmm. I want the US to help me in dealing with China economically. On the other hand, I'm actually under a lot of pressure to comply with US aspirations as far as trade are concerned. So that has not changed. I think there was some expectation of a breakthrough on GSP or breakthrough on trade. And now we are being told things will happen after the elections. God knows what will happen after the elections.
But surely, sorry to interrupt you, but surely the Modi government could have done much more itself. The Indian government could have done more.
Sure. I mean, those are two different issues. Look, I'm not denying that Modi could have done more. Right. But the question is, has Trump done enough for me to assume that having Trump for another 4 years is good for India? I'm not sure. I mean, I don't think it'll make too much of a difference if Joe Biden becomes the president of the United States. But positive or negative on both sides, I don't see much happening. So I don't buy the view that Trump was great for India and therefore Trump going away would be bad for India. I don't buy that view.
Okay. Amy, what do you think? There were a couple of references to India during this debate, both by Trump actually. The first one was when the discussion on the COVID was happening. So the numbers on COVID were being bandied around, and Trump said that, yes, there are 40,000 cases every day, and he talked about 200,000 people having died in America. And then he said, well, if you look at countries like India, you cannot trust their numbers.
Yeah, so a couple of things. On the big question of has Trump been good for India, I think it's important to realize that Trump is an incredibly transactional president. He's incredibly transactional in the way he goes about things. So he came to India in February and, lots of bonhomie with Modi in Gujarat. But was that really because he values India so much, or is it because he decided that it could help him with Indian American voters and, who are now said to be scattered around in a lot of swing states? And, if he could peel some away from the Democratic Party, who, which they've traditionally supported, it could support his reelection. So it's hard to know whether that was really a gesture of love and, a great fellow feeling for India and Modi, or whether it was his own kind of calculated self-interest of how that might help him in the election. So, and even though, again, there's been lots of talk of the personal bonhomie between Modi and India, at the same time, Trump is the one who revoked India's special preferences that were able to, that directly hit India's exports to the US, and which had, removing their kind of low tariff access to the US market. So I think Trump kind of does what he wants to do. And he can say that he loves India and we're all great friends, but I think it's in these moments when he clubs, India with China and Russia that you have a sense that, how does he really think about it? A little more, a window. He's not going to just be diplomatic all the time and tiptoe around Indian sensitivities. On the coronavirus numbers, the fact is he is right about this. The numbers are not that credible. And it is not just Trump, but it is the entire global public health community raising serious questions about the COVID numbers, the death numbers. They are not seen as really credible and complete. Testing in India is far lower than it is in other countries. So if you tested more, you would have more confirmed infections, and the seropositive studies themselves indicate a much higher number of infections in the country than is kind of technically confirmed or reported, and likewise with deaths. I think there's a sense of undercounting.
Sure. But the question that I wanted both of you to answer is, when I asked you about the Trump question and whether he was good for India or not, there was a big Howdy Modi event in Houston last year, followed up, like Amy said, a big sort of tamasha in Ahmedabad earlier this year in February before the pandemic. So Dr. Baru, the Indian American versus the India question, I think that's interesting. Do you think, you're Indian, Amy's American, while she works for a British newspaper, but do you think that the Indian American voter is still going to vote Trump, and how does that feed into what the India question is?
Well, first of all, a large percentage of Indian Americans traditionally have voted Democratic Party.
Yeah, they have not voted, because it seems that in the last few surveys that have been carried out, that shift is already taking place because of Trump.
So a large percentage vote for the Democrats, but those who are voting for Trump are voting for Trump because they saw Trump as a friend of India and as a friend of Modi. So this, the Ahmedabad crowd, if you like, the Modi crowd, the Houston crowd, which are all Howdy Modi, Modi Zindabad, that crowd would have probably wanted to vote for Trump. But yesterday his remarks criticizing India would not go down well with them. While Amy is right that he made a factual statement that India's numbers may not be reliable, and all of us actually think so. To say it in a political debate, if I were an American Hindutva voter watching Trump, and they'd say, "What is this? You're criticizing my Narendra Modi? Why?" So I think the traditional Modi supporters would not have liked Trump questioning India's record on COVID. He may well backtrack on that. I would expect in the next few days, or in his first opportunity with Indian Americans, he may backtrack on that. But if he goes down this road, of criticizing India, whether on this issue or on the other issues of trade, etc., and targets India more and more in the election, then the traditional Modi supporters in the US will have second thoughts. I don't see them feeling that excited about Trump. Though they may not like Biden and they may not like those who support Biden, and they would see them as secular and, liberal left crowd, which the Modi supporters don't like.
Actually, this, my next question is taking off from what you just said, Dr. Baru, which is that Trump kept charging at Biden about the radical left that was influencing him. And that, I thought, Amy, was really interesting. It was almost sort of something that we see in India all the time, is that when you ask somebody from the right wing a question, you are in fact counter question and almost sort of forced to justify what you're thinking. So whether it was on race relations, whether it was on China. But what was also interesting was that China actually did not get that much space in the presidential debate.
That's true. And I mean, there is an effort to depict Joe Biden as some kind of, hostage to the radical left, and to paint the Democratic Party as, extremely radical. Joe Biden himself is kind of a moderate centrist who had a history of bipartisanship, but there is definitely and taking advantage of some of the tensions that are currently playing out in American cities where, after the death of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement and a lot of the simmering tensions, and Trump is actually trying to stoke those tensions because he feels it plays to his advantage, because he can say, look, the forces of anarchy are at the gate and you need me, I'm the law and order candidate. But actually,
isn't that going to tap into this middle America, Amy? The fact that if there is law and there is anarchy on the streets, whether it was, justified or unjustified, and we also saw that he refused to criticize white supremacists in America. But the point that this anarchy will feed into the insecurity of a lot of people, or could feed into the insecurity, and that would be advantage Trump.
I guess it depends to what extent who blames who for this kind of mounting anarchy, right? Obviously the Democratic base will blame Trump for stoking it. The Trump base will blame, the kind of Democrats and other people for stoking it. And again, it's very hard to understand in the minds of undecided voters how they see what is unfolding around them, including very distressing scenes. So I think that's really the issue. And that's why, in some ways, kind of the more rational, I think that this is not going to be like a rational election where people are going to go, oh yeah, the economy was doing a lot better. I think people increasingly on both sides have the feeling that this election is some kind of existential crisis for America. Among the Democrats, there's a mounting concern, and even among many traditional Republicans who are incredibly disillusioned with Trump, who are there is this fascinating phenomenon of centrist, moderate, traditional Republicans who are absolutely aghast with the Trump administration, with Trump, with his family, with his kind of the way he has no respect for propriety, and the way he appears to be like stoking this idea that the election won't be valid and the result, he may or he may not leave depending on if he likes the result. So I think this is turning off a lot of people who do feel, this is an existential crisis. So on the left, there's a feeling, or on Democrats, there's a feeling it's an existential crisis about the future of democracy in America. And on the right, there's a feeling that, this QAnon and their kind of worldview is incredibly extreme and bizarre. So I think this is not going to be a rational election. This is going to be an election based on people voting quite emotionally, I think, about, something that they feel really is the future of the country.
Dr. Baru, you have the last word. Do you think, as Amy said, this is going to be an emotional election? It's obviously a very polarized one, but what do you think?
Yes, I think so. I entirely agree with her, because I think the fact is that there is a lot of concern on both sides. Even Trump's voters, I think, will feel that we have to preserve what we have finally secured, which is the eviction of the elite from the centers of power. So there is a consolidation of the Trump base, but equally, and I agree with Amy, I see like what is happening in India. For example, the traditional Atal Bihari Vajpayee voters of the BJP, those who like that Vajpayee group, Jaswant Singh, Arun Jaitley, that civilized BJP, are so uncomfortable with the current lot of Narendra Modi, Amit Shah, this aggressive phase of the BJP. I think the same thing is happening in the US, where the McCain and his supporters have come out in favor of Biden. So the more gentle right is actually moving to the left, with the right becoming more aggressive. So I do think that a lot of emotional issues of their people's view of what America is all about is going to play an important role.
Well, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much, both of you, Amy Kazmin, Dr. Sanjay Baru. This has been a fascinating debate. Of course, there are 2 more to go, so we will see how both Donald Trump and Joe Biden do in those debates, and I will be calling upon you again. Thank you again for your time. Please continue to watch the YouTube channel of The Print. Subscribe to us. Tell us what you think, and we'll be waiting for your comments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.